"Tell me that's not a pup," Clara muttered, her voice barely audible over the hammering rain. The windshield wipers scraped frantically, clearing a view that still felt smeared with disbelief through the sheet of water and fading daylight. Something moved along the ditch. Not waddling like a stray. Not running either. It was deliberate, almost solemn. A thin, trembling dog limped through the storm with something gripped in her teeth, something wrapped in clear plastic. Clara stopped. The jeep. Her brother, Evan, leaned forward in the passenger seat, squinting past the downpour. "Is that a what the hell is that?" The dog was gaunt, her ribs pressed tight against wet fur, and her tail dragged like it had forgotten how to lift. Her paws sunk slightly into the roadside mud as she stepped through the floodwater pooling along the embankment. She didn't flinch when headlights caught her, nor did she pause when a crack of thunder split the air. She just walked, carrying the thing clumsily, as if it were heavier than it looked, or maybe just sacred. Clara yanked the door open and was out in the storm before Evan could say a word. The rain slapped her arms and soaked her jacket instantly, turning the world into a gray blur stitched together by wind and noise. She stepped off the road into the soggy ditch, boots sinking. The dog stopped, her eyes lifted wide, desperate, intelligent. She didn't growl, didn't run, just stood there, sides heaving, every inch of her soaked to the bone. "Hey girl," Clara said softly, crouching low. "What do you have there?" The plastic bundle shifted in the dog's mouth. Clara saw the shape now. It wasn't an animal, it was too square, too still. "Evan," she called out without taking her eyes off the dog, "bring a towel." The dog looked like she might bolt, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly set the bundle down on the soggy grass and stepped back. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and something about her stance, part guarding, part pleading, made Clara's stomach twist. Evan came jogging up with an old flannel blanket, cursing under his breath about how soaked it already was. But when he saw what lay on the ground, he stopped cold. It was a plastic grocery bag, loosely knotted at the top, torn in one place. Through the tear, something pale showed: paper, fabric, no blood, no obvious weight. Clara reached for it, hesitated, then gently peeled the plastic away. Inside was a bundle of clothing, baby clothing, a pale yellow onesie, mottled with age, a knitted cap, and tucked carefully within it, wrapped in a swaddle too thin to warm anything, was a pacifier. Still wet from the rain, still clean enough to suggest it hadn't been thrown away. Clara's hands went numb. Evan crouched beside her. "There's no way this wasn't in the trash." The dog whined softly. She was standing closer now, her eyes fixed not on them, but on the bundle. Clara looked at the dog's teeth, swollen, recently nursing. She'd had a litter not long ago, but this wasn't one of them. The air felt suddenly colder, as if the storm had reached down their spines. Evan reached out and gently picked up the bundle, careful not to let the fabric fall open. "She carried this," he said, his voice low like it was her own. The dog sat down, not begging, not trembling, just watching. The wind surged again, and in the distance, a car honked and sped past, indifferent to the quiet unfolding in the ditch. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed, far too faint to matter. The trees hissed in the storm. Clara turned her face away from the wind, still clutching the onesie in her hands. "We need to follow her." Evan hesitated. "What if there's more?" Clara looked at the dog. "That's what I'm afraid of." The dog stood again, looked at them both, then turned her head and walked away, not fast, not frightened, just enough to say, "Come with me." And they did, with the bundle clutched close, and a sense that the worst of the storm hadn't passed, at least not the one they'd just stepped into. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it grew heavier, a thick curtain of water blurring the world into streaks of gray and black. The dog moved ahead with slow, deliberate steps, her soaked fur clinging to her thin frame. Clara and Evan followed close behind, boots sinking in muck, arms cradling the bundle as if it were made of glass. She led them away from the road down a narrow path flanked by reeds and saplings, bowed low from the storm. They walked in silence, except for the rhythm of breath, sloshing boots, and the occasional whimper from the dog when the wind grew sharp. She never turned back to check if they were coming. She didn't have to. Clara's grip tightened around the towel-wrapped onesie. "What kind of dog does that?" she whispered, mostly to herself. "Carry something like this through a storm, one with a reason," Evan muttered. "And probably not a reason we want to find." They reached a break in the trees, where the path dipped and widened into a clearing littered with debris, plastic bottles, rusted cans, rotted wood. In the center stood the skeletal remains of what once might have been a hunting shack. One wall had collapsed entirely. The roof leaned like it was too tired to hold itself up any longer. But there was still shelter inside. Barely. Dog slipped through the opening and disappeared into the shadows. Clara hesitated. Something about the place felt still. Too still, even with the storm screaming through the trees. She glanced at Evan, who was already moving, ducking his head under the broken beam to follow the dog. She took a breath and stepped in behind him. Inside, the stink hit first: damp, rot, mold, something older, something wrong. Evan shone the flashlight from his phone around the room. The beam cut across the sagging floorboards, then landed on the far corner where the dog had stopped. There was another bundle. Clara's breath caught. This one wasn't wrapped in plastic, just a crumpled fleece blanket, faded pink, soaked dark from the leaking roof. And the dog, she stood beside it with her muzzle low, tail still, staring at Clara as if daring her to look closer. Clara dropped to her knees. She peeled back the edge of the blanket. Inside lay a small, unmoving form barely distinguishable in the gloom. A puppy, but not breathing, already gone. Its body was stiff, the fur matted with rain and something else. Clara reached instinctively to check, to confirm, though she already knew. Dead. The dog let out a low, keening sound. Not a bark, not a whine. A noise Clara had never heard before. Grief, maybe, or surrender. Something hollowed out by days of trying. Clara's throat clenched as she glanced up at the dog, who now stared not at the pup but at the bundle Clara still carried. The baby's clothing, the pacifier, the onesie yellow and clean. That's not her pup, Evan said, stepping forward. That's not what she lost. That's who. Clara looked at him sharply. What do you mean? She didn't find baby clothes in a dumpster. Not this clean. Not wrapped like that. He exhaled slowly, his voice tight. She was watching someone, maybe saw a real baby, maybe one left behind. The thought settled over the room like a fresh weight. Clara looked down again, at the bundle in her arms, at the dog followed someone here. Tried to help, or worse, had she seen something she couldn't understand, and latched onto the only thing that made sense. The wind roared through a gap in the broken wall. A sheet of rain sliced through and slapped the back of Clara's neck, pulling her harshly back to the present. She stood slowly, shielding the bundle. We can't leave her here. Evan nodded. We take her and the pup too. She's mourning. She's still alive. That's what matters. Outside, the storm showed no signs of relenting. The world beyond the shack had turned to swamp, but Clara didn't care. They gathered what they could. The dead pup was placed gently in the blanket it had been wrapped in. The dog followed without needing to be coaxed, as if she had already made the decision hours ago and was just waiting for them to catch up. They loaded the dog into the back of the Jeep, laying another dry towel on the seat. She curled up, nose to tail, and rested her head on Clara's coat, as though she had always belonged there. As Evan started the engine, Clara turned in her seat to look at the animal again, or naming her Hope. He glanced over, surprised. Hope. Clara nodded slowly, because she carried it when no one else did. The wipers swept across the windshield again. The road ahead was slick and empty, but for the first time in hours, the world felt like it was moving towards something instead, off away from it. But just as they pulled back onto the highway, headlights flashed in the rearview mirror. A patrol car, blue and red lights swirling behind the rain. Evan slowed. Do you think they saw us in the ditch earlier? Clara shrugged, but something in her chest began to tighten. The officer stepped out, rain bouncing off his hood, and walked to the window. He was older, stern-faced, and his eyes flicked instantly to the dog in the back seat, then to the bundle still resting in Clara's lap. You folks out here all night? He asked, voice calm but loaded. Clara nodded. We found her in the storm. She had this wrapped in plastic baby clothes. The officer's jaw set. You need to follow me, he said. Now. Evan blinked. Why? What's going on? The officer took a slow breath. A child's gone missing about 4 miles from here. Infant, taken from a shelter 2 nights ago. Silence exploded in the car. Clara stared down at the bundle in her arms, at the pacifier, the pale yellow onesie, the swaddle too carefully wrapped to be trash. Her mouth went dry. The dog, as if sensing the shift in the air, lifted her head and let out a soft, mournful sound. Clara met Evan's eyes and neither of them said a word. The patrol car's tires sliced through the rainwater as it led them off the highway, headlights casting long, flickering shadows across the drenched asphalt. Clara sat frozen in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around the bundle like it might vanish if she loosened her grip. In the back seat, the dog Hope watched the flashing lights ahead with ears perked, tense but quiet. Every so often she let out a soft whine that seemed to echo through the storm-rattled cabin. Evan glanced at Clara. You think it's really connected? His voice was low, brittle. That baby they mentioned. Clara didn't answer right away. Her mind raced, tumbling through fragments that didn't add up. Hope appearing with the baby's clothes wrapped like a fragile offering. The plastic too clean, too careful to be trash. The bundle had weight to it, not physical, but emotional. Like someone had placed all their last remaining love into it and handed it to the dog. Or the dog had taken it. I don't know, Clara finally whispered, but I think we're in the middle of something we don't understand yet. They turned down a gravel road flanked by deep woods and no signs of life. The rain had eased slightly, but the sky still pressed heavy above them, a thick quilt of dark clouds. At the end of the road, the police vehicle slowed in front of a small cinder-block building lit by 2 flickering halogen lamps. A makeshift sign read, Franklin County Emergency Shelter. Below it, a blue top had been nailed to the wall in place of a door. The officer waved them into a parking spot and motioned for them to stay put. Hope stood as they pulled in, pacing nervously across the back seat, eyes darting toward the windows. The officer returned moments later, this time with a woman following behind, mid-30s, thin with soaked hair stuck to her face and an oversized hoodie clinging to her like armor. Her eyes were red, hollow, but when she saw the bundle in Clara's lap, her face changed, twitched, then crumpled. "Where did you find that?" she choked out. Clara stepped out slowly, still holding the baby clothes. "A dog. She brought it to us in her mouth. We followed her to a broken-down shack." Her voice cracked, and she had to pause. There was a dead puppy, and this was there too, wrapped up like someone meant to keep it safe. The woman stepped forward, trembling. "That's Ellie's. That's my baby's onesie, and the pacifier. She won't sleep without it." She reached out instinctively, then stopped, hands hanging in the air. "You saw her, you saw my baby." Clara shook her head slowly, regret sinking deep into her chest. "We didn't see a baby, just this." Hope barked one short sharp. Her tail thumped anxiously against the seat. The officer narrowed his eyes, then motioned to a second patrolman. "Let's bring the dog in. I want someone to scan her for a chip." Inside the shelter, the smell of damp clothes, boiled beans, and bleach hung thick. A woman at a folding table worked through paperwork, with a flashlight tucked under her chin. Clara watched as Hope was led gently through the narrow hall, the towel still damp beneath her paws. In a side room, another officer brought in a microchip scanner and ran it along the back of Hope's neck. The machine beeped. "She's chipped," he said. "Registered last year to a Marion Tate rural address, about 6 miles northeast." The name meant nothing to Clara, but the woman, the baby's mother, jerked her head up. "Marion Tate. She used to volunteer here. Had some kind of breakdown last fall. Started saying the government was watching her. Took the dog everywhere. Sometimes brought food, sometimes just sat outside." The officer stiffened. "Does she still live out there?" "I don't know. She stopped showing up, lest anyone heard. She'd boarded up her house and started talking about angels protecting children. We thought maybe she'd left town." Evan, who'd stayed quiet until now, stepped forward. "What if she didn't leave? What if she took the baby, thinking she was protecting her?" The silence that followed was thick and immediate. Clara looked at Hope, who had sat down now, eyes flicking between everyone in the room. The way she carried that bundle, the direction she led them, the shelter address connected to her owner. She hadn't been wandering aimlessly. She had been guiding them. The officer was already barking into his radio, calling for backup, an ambulance, and child protective services. The room ignited with motion coats being grabbed, weapons holstered, radios crackling. The mother collapsed into a chair, trembling. "If she has Ellie, oh God, she could be hurt, or hungry, or cold." "We're going now," the officer assured her. "Already moving. Stay here. We'll bring your daughter home." But Clara didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Hope, who was now whining softly and pawing at the shelter door. "She didn't want to stay. She knows where to go," Clara said suddenly. "Don't leave her behind." The officer looked at her, then at the dog. Something shifted in his face, reluctance giving way to understanding. He gave a short nod. 10 minutes later, they were back on the road. This time, Hope rode in the front of the squad car with her head on the console, eyes alert. Evan drove close behind, headlights tracking the turns as the police vehicle led them toward the northeast woods. Clara sat in silence, one hand resting on the empty bundle beside her, the other on her lap. The storm had finally begun to clear, and in the distance, a faint orange glow pushed against the clouds, dawn threatening to rise. As the forest thinned, a crooked mailbox appeared, rusted and half swallowed by vines. The patrol car slowed and turned onto a dirt drive that cut between pine trees and wild overgrowth. At the end of the road, a cabin came into view, windows covered with cardboard, the front door hanging askew. And from somewhere inside, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a baby crying. Hope barked and sprinted for the door. The crying was faint for comfort. It floated through the trees like a thread unraveling in the wind, thin and strained, rising just above the creak of the pines and the crunch of boots on gravel. The cabin stood crooked at the end of the drive, cloaked in shadow despite the early morning light pressing gently against the sky. One shutter hung loose, slapping against the siding as the wind picked up. The yard was overgrown, scattered with plastic bins, rusted lawn tools, and a child's car seat tipped on its side, half covered in vines. Hope didn't hesitate. She bolted straight for the door, nose low, body taut with urgency. She stopped just short of the threshold and turned her head sharply, barking once sharp and commanding. "She knows something's inside," Clara said, already moving behind her. The squad car's headlights stayed on, casting long beams over the wild grass and splintered porch. The officers fanned out, weapons drawn but lowered. One called out, "Marianne Tate. This is the sheriff's department. We need you to come outside." No answer. Another sharp cry from inside, this time louder. Wet, tired, definitely a baby. That was all the permission Hope needed. She surged forward and nosed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, scraping across warped floorboards. Then she vanished inside. "Wait," Clara started, but Evan caught her arm. "Let them go first," he said. His voice was tight, eyes locked on the entrance. "Let them check it's safe." Two officers followed the dog in, flashlights sweeping the dark interior. Moments later, one called out, "Clear on the right." Movement, rear hallway. Clara couldn't take the waiting. She stepped forward, heart hammering, the bundle of baby clothes still clutched like a talisman against her chest. The porch boards creaked under her boots. Evan hovered behind her, one hand twitching nervously at his side. Then, a sound low trembling. Not the baby this time. A woman's voice, dry and splintered. She was too cold, it whispered. She wouldn't stop crying, so I wrapped her up. Like a present. Like a prez. The hallway was narrow and dim, paneled in peeling pine boards. Hope stood at the far end, blocking the path. Her body was rigid, ears low, a soft growl humming in her throat. Just beyond her, a woman knelt on the floor, long gray hair matted. Against her back, eyes sunk deep in a pale, exhausted face. In her arms she held a bundled form, teeny swaddled, trembling Marion Tate. The lead officer asked softly, "We're here to help. Is that the child you took from the shelter?" The woman looked up, blinking slowly. "No one took her," she said. "She was left in the cold. I saw the angels show me. The dog knew where to find her." Clara stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "Marion, the baby's mother is waiting. She's safe now. You've done enough. But she needs care right now." Marion shook her head, cradling the baby tighter. No, not yet. She's still so small, so light. I thought if I kept her warm, maybe she'd grow wings." Hope barked again, a sharp, startling sound that sliced the tension in the air. She stepped forward, nudging Marion's arm gently, insistently. The woman looked down at the dog as if just noticing her. "You came back," she whispered. "You found them." Clara moved beside the officers, her voice softened. "Let me take her, Marion. She's shivering. We'll get her warm. We'll make sure the mother knows you protected her." Something flickered across Marion's face, then fear, grief, maybe relief. Her arms loosened slightly, just enough. An officer moved forward carefully and took the bundle. The baby let out a thin cry, barely a protest, her tiny hands balled up against the swaddle. Clara reached out, brushing her fingers across the infant's forehead. She was ice cold but alive. Alive. The breath she'd been holding finally slipped free. As they backed out of the hallway, Hope followed closely, pressing against Clara's legs like a shadow. The officers flanked them as they returned to the porch. The morning had shifted now, the storm finally gone, light breaking through the trees in long golden strands. Somewhere behind them, Marion's soft voice floated down the hall like a hymn. "I only meant to save her, just save one." An ambulance waited at the road's edge. EMTs rushed forward, lifting the baby from Clara's arms and swaddling her again in warming packs. Oxygen, vitals, quick, careful movements that spoke of relief and practiced urgency. The baby's mother ran from the shelter, a blanket clutched around her. When she saw her child breathing, moving, her legs gave out beneath her. She sobbed into the grass before someone helped her back up. Clara couldn't hear what she said, only saw her hands reach out like they were thanking every god at once. Hope sat beside Clara, tail twitching once, then going still. "She's alive because of you," Clara whispered, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ear. "You carried the sign. You led the way." Evan stood beside her, wiping rain and sweat from his brow. "We followed a dog into the woods, Clara," he said, "and we found a baby." "No," she replied quietly. "We followed a mother." Behind them, Marion was gently helped into the back of a patrol car. She didn't resist, didn't scream. She just looked through the glass at Hope's eyes meeting one last time. There was no rage, no madness, only a tired kind of peace. And as the sirens rose in the distance and the sun cracked fully through the storm clouds, Clara finally let go of the bundle of empty baby clothes. She didn't need them anymore. Hope had already carried the weight they once held. The sun had fully risen by the time Clara and Evan stood again at the edge of the clearing. The morning breeze carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. The rain had washed the world clean, but everything still felt bruised, quiet in a way that made you take smaller steps. The ambulance was gone, sirens fading hours ago, and the patrol cars had cleared the driveway. All that remained was the cabin, the tall trees swaying gently overhead, and the tired rustle of nature returning to its rhythm. Hope lay stretched on the ground beside the porch, head on her paws, eyes closed but not asleep. Her body had stopped trembling, but the tension still lingered just beneath her fur, like the storm hadn't quite let her go. Clara sat next to her on the worn steps, a fleece blanket draped around her shoulders, damp at the edges. She hadn't said much since the baby was taken safely into the EMT's arms. Words felt inadequate. She kept replaying the scene, the baby's tiny cry, the fragile warmth of her body, Marion's hollow voice, and the unwavering focus of a dog who never lost her purpose. None of it made sense in the way people usually demand it to, and yet every moment had led them here. "She didn't just stumble into us," Clara said quietly. "She chose us." Evan leaned against the porch beam behind her, arms folded, his own blanket slipping off one shoulder. "You mean the dog?" Clara nodded. She saw something in that baby, something she understood. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was just heartbreak. But she did what no one else did. She carried it, protected it, until someone finally listened. Evan didn't argue. He just stared out into the trees, silent. They stayed like that for a while. The air had turned lighter, the sounds of the forest rising cautiously again, birds reappearing on branches. insects humming through damp grass. It was like watching life return in slow motion. Eventually, the sheriff returned. No lights, no urgency. Just a single cruiser pulling up the drive and crunching to a quiet stop. He stepped out, hat in hand, and walked over with a slow, deliberate calm. "The baby's stable," he said. "Warming up, feeding on her own. They're keeping her for observation, but the docs say she's gonna be fine." Clara's eyes burned. She nodded once. Quickly the sheriff crouched, placing a gentle hand on Hope's head. She didn't flinch. "And this one here. You know what she did. Most wouldn't believe it." Clara met his eyes. "She knew before we did." He looked away for a moment, then back. "Marion's being evaluated. Psychiatric hold, most likely. She was lucid, just not tethered. Said she thought the baby was a gift left behind, that she wasn't stealing. She was answering something. She never would have hurt her," Clara said. "No," he agreed. "Doesn't seem like she would have." He stood, brushing off his hands. "We traced the chip. The address listed is abandoned now, but the records show Hope was spayed through. A rescue in town a year ago, they remember her. She was found with a litter that didn't make it." Clara closed her eyes. "So she lost her own puppies, then found that baby. Looks that way." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't heavy, just full. The sheriff tipped his head. "You planning on keeping her?" Clara looked down at Hope. The dog blinked once, lifting her head to meet Clara's gaze, ears pricking slightly. "She already decided she's staying," Clara said, a soft smile playing at her lips. "I'm just catching up." The sheriff chuckled and nodded. "I'll file the paperwork to transfer her chip. She's yours." As he walked back to the cruiser, Evan finally stepped forward and dropped onto the porch beside her. "You realize we're gonna have to explain this to everyone," Clara snorted. "What do we even say? That a dog rescued a baby in the middle of a storm because nobody else heard her crying? Sounds about right. Sounds like something no one would believe." Evan leaned back, stretching his legs. "Maybe they don't have to. Maybe it's enough that we believe it." Hope nudged her nose into Clara's palm. Her fur was still damp, but her body had relaxed, tail thumping faintly against the wood. There was no urgency left in Herge's presence, just a mother who had done everything she could and finally found her rest. Clara stroked her gently, eyes following the way the morning sun lit up the trees, scattering gold across the clearing. Everything felt quieter now, but not empty, not lost, just settled. They would leave this place soon. The baby was safe. Marion would get help, and Hope had a home, not just a roof or a bowl of food, but someone who had seen her carry something through the storm and refused to look away. Some stories don't need embellishment. Some don't need words. Just the weight of a warm body beside you, the sound of breath rising and falling, and the quiet, indelible truth that love doesn't always look how we expect it to. Sometimes it limps through the rain on four legs. Sometimes it carries a miracle in its mouth, and sometimes it waits for us to follow until we do.